I don't have a prepared text today. What I often do is put together some images and then talk about images, about objects. Apparently we all got this treatment from the Tampa Tribune at one time or another. There we are holding a pot, and look at all that rich brown hair. I enjoyed my time here. I was here 18 months before I left for Princeton. I didn't think I was going anywhere, but I was surprised when something else came up and life took me elsewhere. But one of the first things, I came here from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where I was a curatorial assistant, and they were good enough to lend 65 pieces to the museum that we put on a special exhibition of, Ancient Riches, and that Stearns Weaver paid for. And those 65 objects stayed on long-term loan for a decade until they called them back, and they helped get the classical collection rejuvenated and refreshed with new objects. And I loved being able to collect. Tampa didn't have a big acquisition budget, and it still doesn't, because of all these lovely programming funds. I was telling someone that I would have taken the $2 million from the column from Gus and Bobby and just blown it on a $2 million object. But instead, the collectors group that we had at the time went to New York and helped me pick out this Roman grave altar inscribed to a freedman, which covered a lot of bases artistically and educationally. Jack Salmon gave us the pedestal geometric crater from the late 8th century, Italo-geometric crater. And Jerry Eisenberg, who recently passed away, gave us the nice alabastron with a griffin, griffin bird. So I enjoyed objects. Objects are what curators like. You know, they say that it's good to be a people person, but in our line of work, the ultimate compliment is to be called an object person. And Bill Zewadski is both a people person and an object person. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but not necessarily in this talk, which I'm going to talk about an object. But objects, I saw this and wanted to share it. Objects of art do not merely interest and absorb, they move us. We are concerned with them and care about them. We treat them in special ways, invest them with a value which normal people, otherwise reserve only for other people. And with the same kind of scorn and outrage. They mean something to us, the way people do. This object was given to the Tampa Museum of Art in 1986 by Bill Zewadski. He'd bought it a couple of years earlier at an auction in Switzerland, well before I thought he had been collecting internationally like that. And it's about the size of my fist, and it's called a guttus. A guttus is a little, I heard Bronco call it a cruet. Their function has been disputed. Were they for wine? Were they for oil? John Boardman made the sensible suggestion that they're what cruets are for. They're for vinegar. And vinegar is just wine that is a little older than it should be and goes on salad. Mold made, plastic. We say plastic's not made of plastic, plastic in the sense that it's been modeled into, they made a clay matrix, took a mold off of that, and from the mold put slabs of clay in. It's flat on the bottom, got a ring handle on the side, which is what a guttus would have. An oscos has a bale handle. And this tilted spout with a molding on the end. Works perfect as a cruet. There's a large class of these, and from both Greece and from especially South Italy. Now, who have we got here? From the beginning, there hasn't been any question that it's an African, or as the Greeks would call them, the Ethiopians. They called everybody who was a black African an Ethiopian. The Egyptians knew them as Nubians, and a lot of the Africans that you would see in the Mediterranean were probably Nubians, because the easiest way to get to the Mediterranean is simply sail up the Nile, whereas instead of coming through the Horn of Africa and otherwise. It's been questioned whether it's male or female, but to me, how many people think it's a male? 3. How many people think it's a female? We're supposed to think that because that's what it is. There's just enough of it there that we're confident in calling it that. An African female. The hair has been worked, after you get it out of the mold, you can take a tool and size some more lines and details in it. Earrings, lunate earrings. It's painted black, black gloss, we call it black glaze, is a gloss. It's liquid clay that's been refined, and when it fires in the kiln, it turns black. But then there are clays that have no iron in them, kaolin, and they fire white in the kiln. So for the eyebrows, top of the eye, and black, they left the iris reserve. And then there's a red that has extra iron. That's liquid clay that has extra iron in it. It fires red. So for the parted mouth that animates the mouth, you've got high cheekbones, a sort of grin there, a broad nose, a red fillet, a bandeau going across the hair, which is not atypical. But why? What's going on here? Let's see another view of it. There she looks even more female, I think, in this side view. Why did you want this on your table? Was there something African in it? Was it African vinegar? Well, it's not impossible. It might have been imported from Tunisia. Maybe there's a certain grape there that makes a good cruet. But of Africans, there were many. All over the Mediterranean. If you go down to the Piraeus, the port of Athens, you'd see Syrians and Libyans, you'd see Egyptians, and you'd see Africans, the Ethiopians. This is an Egyptian relief. These are Egyptian slave drivers who are literally beating these poor Nubian slaves with sticks while a scribe keeps notes about how many they are and who's been buying them and so on. They seem to have reveled in their distinction from themselves and to have exaggerated the figures, although you might even wonder if this is a series of portraits that the artist went out one day and set and sketched a couple of slaves. Every African we see in Greek or Egyptian art is not a slave, but they turn up in Greek art quite frequently. There's the group of white ground alabastra that feature an African warrior, and he's wearing trousers always and sleeves, because Greeks knew the Scythians up in the North Sea where it's cold, and they wore trousers and sleeves. The Greeks didn't wear those. That's a barbarian attire, but they've mixed it up with the peoples of of Africa, of sub-Saharan Africa, where they're not wearing long sleeves and trousers. It just means barbarian. And in this case, you've combined two different kinds of. To a Greek, barbarian comes from the word barbaros. Barbaros is somebody who, when they tried to speak Greek, sound like bar, to the Greek ear. That's all it means, is somebody who can't speak Greek. The king of Persia, a very sophisticated gentleman, was a barbarian because he didn't speak Greek. East Greek potsherd, what we think are Africans. This piece on the right is a Roman date, 2nd century. There's plenty of Africans in Roman. It would have been on the wall of a tomb. And then there's a Greek vase of about 490 BC, Attic vase, red figure. A nude Greek athlete, a sign of Greek civilization with an oil bottle in the sponge. He's throwing the javelin. But then here's a young African. We call him young because he's small. They show age by just showing you shorter. Well, non-Greeks were not allowed to exercise in the nude in the palestra of the gymnasium. So unless he's the ambassador from Ethiopia, it's more likely that he's a servant or slave of this man. He's carrying, bring me the jumping weights, he says, the halteres. But it's unusual. We don't have another depiction of an African in Attic art quite like that. In mythology, Africans have a limited range. They are, in the myth of Andromeda, who's exposed to a sea monster on her father, the king of Ethiopia, had to do this to save the kingdom. And here are two Africans who've been painted in outline on the black glaze in white, taking advantage of the black background to indicate them as Africans. The other myth that's commonly where Africans appear is when Heracles allowed himself to be captured by the king of the Egyptians, Osiris, and about to be sacrificed at an altar. And at the last minute, he rose up and killed Osiris and all the Africans. And they're often represented as Africans, black Africans, even though we have this distinction. But that's 900 years earlier as well. Let's keep that in mind. So it's not one way. Now, this vessel is of a type that is mold-made, and there are many kinds. They go back to Archaic period, it's Corinthian 6th century. But you have head vases, animal vases, made with molds and combined with wheel-thrown lips and mouths and handmade handles. This is in the Tampa collection in the form of a lobster claw. An ascos may also have served as a cruet. Africans come in because there are a lot of these plastic vessels that have got Africans. There's one on loan from Mr. Hasse, Mr. and Mrs. Hasse in the galleries now. And often back to back. Sometimes we have them just by themselves, or it's a Greek woman, let's call her a Menad maybe, since she has an ivy leaf, with an African. Why? We don't know. We really don't know. It's possible that these were slaves, or they were freedmen, or we don't know. There's no writing. Nobody tells us what's going on. Also, the women might be back to back with a satyr, suggesting that the satyrs and the Africans were considered equally exotic, as though Africans were real enough. They couldn't quite convince themselves that they were real as they were looking at them in the Piraeus. There's a whole genre of these plastic vessels with Africans. Attacked by a crocodile on the Nile. A pygmy who nobody had ever seen, but they'd heard about them. And they were little people, so they showed them as dwarves. Carrying a dead crane. The pygmies battled with the crane in the film. This is a Apulian, South Italian plastic vessel in the form of an African. This is Etruscan. Well, the one we're looking at is also Apulian. The heel of Italy. The boot of Italy, you got the toe, you got the arch. The heel is Puglia, ancient Apulia. And we get vessels like this, guttus. But we very seldom get, and you get them most often in this case, in black, all black, with a relief molded design. And in larger vessels in the form of animals and others. This in Prince's collection is of a drunken Silenus, who's an old satyr, who's lying in the gutter holding a mug and sort of looking up saying, what? But Apulian, mole-made, gutoi, not common, uncommon. This one's in Fiesole, this one's in Boston. Here we have a pan because he's got horns as well. You know, pans are part goat, satyrs are part horse until later in time. So it's part of a genre. But in 1984, nobody was buying these very often. Nobody knew there was going to be a gallery about identity. Nobody knew there was going to be discussion about diversity. Bill Zewadski, though, is always looking ahead. Always looking ahead. What did he mean by doing that? Well, Bill is like Walt Whitman. He's large. He contains multitudes. I'm not saying he's two-faced. No, he's always honest and straightforward. But it's difficult to remain just one person. Bill is in evolution always. Our house is always open and there are no keys in the door. Invisible guests come in and out at will. Thank you.